Defending Israel with David Harris on JBS is made possible in part by a generous gift in memory of Eric and Mira J. Spector, the Paul and Lynn Late Family Foundation, To Life, to Love, Barbara and Bob Goodkind, the Patricia Worthen Ullman Foundation,
Hello, JBS viewers. I'm David Harris, and this is Defending Israel. And this week, I'd like to speak once again from my heart to your heart. And the theme of this week is outrage, anger, dismay. You may be feeling the same way. In a way, I hope you are. I'm outraged by what I'm seeing. As an American Jew, as a Zionist, as a lifelong friend of Israel. To be honest, in my case, the anger and the outrage didn't begin yesterday, or for that matter, even on October 7th. It actually explains why I chose in the end to give up my fantasy dreams about becoming an American diplomat, or maybe a New York Times foreign correspondent, or maybe a faculty member at a New England college, and instead, beginning in 1975, to devote myself to the Jewish world full time. The anger then was because of the unfair treatment of Israel in the world. The anger then was because of the repression of millions of Jews in the Soviet Union behind the Iron Curtain. The anger then was because of the global nonchalance after 11 Israeli athletes and coaches were brutally murdered during the Summer Olympic Games. The anger then was because there were people 30 years after the Holocaust that were questioning whether the Holocaust had ever really happened. So there was lots of reason for anger and outrage and dismay, and I tried to channel it constructively, positively, into a career on the front lines in the Jewish world. And that anger and passion and dismay continued as I worked. And I fast forward over many issues along the way to the present time. How can it be that we, American Jews, who arrived in this country 370 years ago, 1654, and have viewed this experience as a unique chapter in Jewish history? America, this extraordinary, exceptional country. Sure, there were bumps along the road during that 370-year journey, but we American Jews did not feel like guests. Never. Nor were we made to feel like guests. We were stakeholders. We were shareholders. And now, in recent months, many have begun to question, is that extraordinary journey of 370 years, if not coming to an end, changing dramatically? What is it that explains this surge in anti-Semitism, this exponential surge in anti-Semitism? What is it that explains the FBI hate crime statistics, which show that between 50 and 60% of all religiously based hate crimes in the United States are targeted at 2% of the population, we Jews? Again, 2% of the population, between 50 and 60% of all religiously motivated hate crimes. What explains the surge of sheer hatred, naked hatred, that we've seen on some American campuses? Or the indifference, or the studied neutrality of too many institutions and their leaders in whom we had invested our trust? What explains it? What explains the open calls for genocide against the one and only Jewish majority nation on earth, Israel, the lone democracy in the Middle East, and a unique ally of the United States in that important part of the world. I can go on and on citing more and more examples of what should trigger that anger and that outrage. Did you see the images in Canada of a young Jewish child who was accompanied by up to 150 people in order to ensure his safety and his emotional and physical well-being in Canada? That liberal democracy in which some 400,000 Jews have also lived securely and confidently for so many years? Have we seen the images of a Jewish professor on a University of California campus denied access to his own campus, just as we saw an Israeli professor at Columbia University denied access solely on the basis of demonstrators, protesters blocking them, either as Israelis, as Zionists, or as Jews? Have we seen the testimonies, the powerful testimonies of undergraduate students, whether at Harvard, at Cornell, at Penn, or elsewhere, who've told these tragic stories of how their own campus experiences were largely destroyed simply for the fact that they are Jewish or identifiably Jewish or members of a Jewish organization or proud supporters of Hillel and of Israel? What has gone wrong here? And even more importantly, what is it that we can or should be doing? Because the answer must never be a kind of complacency or normalization of what we're witnessing. Ladies and gentlemen, JBS viewers, there is nothing normal about a Jewish child having to be accompanied by 150 adults simply for the act of going to school one morning. And there is nothing normal about a faculty member being prevented from access to his own university by demonstrators taking over the parts of the campus and denying him entry. There is nothing normal about any of this. And we should be losing sleep. And we should be ensuring that others lose sleep as well, until there is some sense of renormalization, if there's such a term, both in this country and also in its understanding of Israel. The big question is not just what's going on and whether we're awake or awake enough. The big question is, most importantly, what do we do about it? And this is where I think the conversation needs to lead us all. And here I want to say, and I've said it before on this show, we need a post-October 7th playbook. The October 6th playbook served its purpose, but only up to a point, it seems, but it's no longer valid. And all of us who are looking for navigation and guidance in terms of how do we channel that anger, how do we channel that shock and dismay constructively, positively, we need leadership. We are at war. I said on this show, beginning after October the 7th, there are three front lines in this war. The first front line is the Israeli military front line against a brutal, genocidal, sadistic, foreign terrorist organization, designated as such by the US government under Bill Clinton. That's a war that we can watch from afar and where we can only hope and pray and cheer that Israel will come out the clear victor. The second front is the Israeli home front. Israeli civilians have been targeted prior to October 7th, since October 7th. Thousands, tens of thousands of rockets and missiles. Thousands of people crossing the border from Gaza, and as we all know, committing unspeakable atrocities against Israeli civilians. Kibbutzim, families, music festivals, nothing was off limits, nothing. And there the home front has shown its resilience, its loyalty to the state of Israel, its determination not not to be moved. And then there's the third front, the American front. Here, our adversaries have made clear that their long game is to try and drive a wedge between Washington and Jerusalem, to try and undo the unique and special relationship between the United States and the State of Israel. A relationship that began in 1948 when President Harry Truman resisted those in his own government who said, "Don't recognize that new state." And he did, inspired by the Psalm, by the rivers of Babylon, yea, we wept when we remembered Zion. Harry Truman, a student of the Bible, had absorbed that message from his own biblical studies and understood that, like the ancient Cyrus, he could help return the Jews once again to our ancestral, our biblical, our eternal homeland, Israel. And that relationship between the United States and Israel continued. Sure, along the way there were bumps in the road. Even among the best of friends, there are bumps in the road between the US and Canada, the US and Britain. But the relationship has been unique, and our adversaries have made clear that their goal is to separate Washington and Jerusalem. We again cannot let them succeed. So we need leadership. We need a war cabinet. We need a General Eisenhower, a General Marshall, a General Montgomery. We need those who will help us in the new era, post-October 7th, to say, forget the old strategies and habits. Here's what we need to do. In the meantime, the first thing I would say is we need our sense of confidence that we are defending just causes. We American Jews, having lived on American soil for 370 years, have nothing, I repeat, nothing to apologize for in our nearly 4 centuries on this soil. We embrace this country from day one. We have loved this country. We have contributed to this country mightily in every way, shape, and form. There's not a nook and cranny of American society and success in which Jews have not actively and often largely contributed. Nothing to apologize for. We have contributed to every liberal institution in America. We've contributed to every social cause in America. We have done as much as we possibly could to help America fulfill its promise, not just for Jews, but for all Americans, minority Americans, disadvantaged Americans, marginalized Americans. We need to walk proudly. And we need to walk proudly as friends of Israel, even if we have chosen to live in the United States. Israel is a just cause. And those who want to tar and feather Israel, suggesting that it is nothing more than a white settler, colonialist, occupying state, or whatever the language of the day may be, are know-nothings. They don't begin to understand the story of Israel, a story which began nearly 4,000 years ago, a land to which Jews are umbilically linked, religiously, spiritually, metaphysically, archaeologically, personally. We are metaphysically linked. And those who want to suggest that Israel is nothing more than a version of French colonialism in Africa or the Caribbean, or British colonialism in Asia or the Middle East or Africa, or Spanish or Portuguese or Italian or German colonialism, or Belgian or Dutch colonialism, they don't have their facts. They don't know what they're talking about. Israel is central to the Jewish story and has been from the beginning. Our prayer books do not speak about Bialystok, about Brooklyn, about Benghazi, about Baghdad. Our prayer books speak about Zion and Jerusalem and Judea and Israel and the children of Israel. That's our story, and that's our link. So we need pride and confidence. We need more knowledge. we need to understand much better that the truth is on our side, that history is on our side, that the facts are on our side in explaining our relationship to Zionism and to Israel. We don't need to be apologetic Jews. On the other hand, we never must be triumphalistic Jews. Israel is part of a larger region, and our goal has always been from the beginning to seek peace with neighbors, and that includes the Palestinians. And again, our knowledge, our confidence has to include an understanding that there didn't have to be this conflict with the Palestinians or the larger Arab world. That as early as 1937 in the British Peel Commission, or 1947 in the United Nations Special Committee on Palestine and the United Nations General Assembly, there could have been a two-state solution. I repeat, there could have been a two-state solution. Israel accepted the compromises put on the table, even though Israel or the Jewish leaders would have wished for more. But they understood that a half of loaf of bread is better than no loaf for a hungry people. And the Jews were hungry for safety, hungry for security, hungry for sovereignty, hungry to end the dependence on other societies which too often did not treat Jews fairly. The Arab side, the Palestinian leadership said no repeatedly. Think about this. From 1948 until 1967, for 19 years, the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, Eastern Jerusalem were not, I repeat, not in Israeli hands. Gaza was ruled by Egypt. The West Bank and Eastern Jerusalem were ruled by Jordan. Where was the Palestinian state? Where was the conversation about the Palestinian state? Have you heard any? I haven't. In all the history books that I've studied, I have seen no references to any suggestion of a Palestinian state when these territories were in Arab, I repeat, Arab, not Israeli hands. And fast forward to October the 7th. Are we Jews supposed to somehow crouch defensively about what happened on October the 7th? Or let the world conveniently forget the barbaric atrocities, the sexual violence, the body mutilation, the destruction of families before the children's eyes, and the glee, the ecstasy with which the perpetrators from Gaza committed all of these acts, from murder to kidnapping, calling on their cell phones to their families back home, ecstatically reporting on how many Jews they killed, or brandishing the knives or other weapons that were used in the process? Are we supposed to somehow feel that we have to explain an Israeli response? Ladies and gentlemen, 1,200 people were killed in Israel on one day, October the 7th. In American proportional terms, America being 35 times larger than Israel in population terms, 42,000 Americans, 240 people were kidnapped in Israel on that one day. In American proportional terms, that would mean over 8,000. I ask you, if 42,000 people had been killed on 9/11, for example, or if more than 8,000 people had been kidnapped by ISIS or Al-Qaeda or the Iranian Islamic regime, what exactly would the response of this country be? And I couldn't care at that point whether it was a Democrat, a Republican, a liberal, or a conservative sitting in the Oval Office. What would be the response of our country? Well, we saw the response of our country after 9/11, when nearly 3,000 people were killed, no one kidnapped. We saw the response of our country in 1941 with a Democrat in power when Imperial Japan attacked Pearl Harbor and nearly 3,000 people were killed and much damage to our Pacific Naval Fleet. We went to war in both cases against Japan for nearly 4 years. We bombed Japan to smithereens. We dropped 2 atomic bombs on cities, civilian populations in Nagasaki and Hiroshima, in order to ensure that Imperial Japan would be destroyed, never to rise up again. We carpet bombed Germany, from Hamburg to Munich, from Dresden to Leipzig. Millions of civilians were killed, not because we wanted to, not because we got any glee from it, but in order to ensure that Nazi Germany would never rise again. Israel is now 7 months into its response. Even harder because Hamas weaponizes civilians, knowing that the BBC, knowing that the New York Times and the Washington Post and National Public Radio and others will immediately focus on damage to civilians without pointing out the weaponization, the instrumentalization of Gaza's civilians. Why is it that of the 21 Arab countries, not one has taken Gaza's civilians temporarily to remove them completely from any danger? The IDF has made clear we have no war with Gaza's civilians. We have no war with the Palestinians. Why should we? We're destined to be neighbors forever. Our war is with Hamas. Our war is with Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Our war is with Iran's long tentacles in the region and Qatar's funding of the Muslim Brotherhood and these extremist groups. That's where the war is. We need confidence. We also need to be able to talk to our children and grandchildren. If they're in high school, if they're in college, if they're in student groups, they may be facing some very tricky situations. How will they respond to those tricky situations in the classroom, in the dormitory, in the hallway, on the quad? We need to give them knowledge and information and confidence. I keep repeating the word, not just competence, but confidence, that if they stand up for the Jewish people, if they stand up for the state of Israel, they're doing so for a just and worthy cause. And yes, they're going to find incoming flack. And yes, some are now going to point, for example, to this ludicrous decision of a prosecutor at the International Criminal Court who determined this week that Israeli leaders and Hamas leaders are morally equivalent. That the arsonist, Hamas, that triggered the war, that is a designated foreign terrorist organization by the EU and the United States and Canada and others, that those leaders are to be put on the same moral plane as Israel's leaders trying to defend their country after October 7th, trying to locate and free the remaining hostages, and trying to ensure that the stated purpose of Hamas, the genocide, the annihilation of the state of Israel and all of its 9.5 million inhabitants, will not succeed. So the ICC puts the two on a moral plane? Outrageous, shocking, appalling. And by the way, in the same week, we saw the helicopter crash that took the life of the butcher of Tehran, as he's called, President Raisi, as well as the foreign minister and other Iranian officials. And do you know how the BBC, again so problematically, has reported on the death? By speaking of, I quote, his mixed legacy. The mixed legacy of the president of Iran, the butcher of Tehran, who has blood on his hands thousands of times, the blood of political dissidents in Iran, the blood of women rights activists in Iran, the blood of free-thinking religious figures in Iran. He has their blood, but the BBC said he had a mixed legacy Because they explained to their viewers, he helped speed up the logjam in the judicial process and the backlog of cases. For that, he gets the title of mixed legacy. His only mixed legacy, BBC and others who stood for a moment of silence, who expressed their condolences, who extended their thoughts and prayers to the Iranian Islamic regime. The only mixed legacy he has is he wasn't successful in completing his task. He got to thousands and thousands. He murdered them. He tortured them. He isolated and arrested them. He couldn't complete the job. That's his only mixed legacy. What else should we be doing? We should be traveling to Israel. We should be volunteering. There are many programs in Israel for volunteers, and members of my family have volunteered as doctors to work on a military base preparing medical kits for the medics, to work on kibbutzim and moshavim to help pick the fruit, because otherwise the fruit will spoil because there aren't enough workers. How about here in the United States to ensure that we're supporting those companies and those shops and those businesses that stand proudly with Israel? Just in my neighborhood in New York, recently, an Israeli-owned cafe was desecrated. An Israeli restaurant was assaulted. Some Jewish-owned stores that have a mezuzah on their entryway were also daubed with graffiti or accused of whatever, genocide or some other outrageous crime. We should be lining up outside each of these shops and businesses. We should be supporting them in every way we can. And now I want to come, as we begin to wrap up, to a central message. Above all, we need to be in touch with our elected officials on the local level, the state level, the federal level, as well as candidates running for office. And this is the season, as people look to primaries later this summer or to the elections in November, they want your vote. They want your endorsement. They want your support. And I'm saying this as a lifelong Jewish activist, advocate, and ambassador. Nonpartisan. Make them fight for your vote. Don't let any political candidate or party take your vote for granted. Too often, if I can be blunt, the Democratic Party of late has taken your vote and support for granted. No longer. If they want your vote and they want your support, make clear that you want clear, unambiguous, continued special relationship between Washington and Jerusalem. And you want an administration which is clear, unconditional, and unambiguous in its determination to call out and to fight anti-Semitism wherever it comes from the extreme right, from the extreme left, or from jihadist circles, and doesn't try to politicize anti-Semitism in any way, shape, or form. And the Republican Party wants your vote too. It should be possible for them to make their appeal to you. Again, I'm a nonpartisan, but I want to see both parties believing the Jewish vote is up for grabs and that it's worth fighting for. Arab Americans have somehow convinced the White House that everything depends on the state of Michigan, and in particular on the city of Dearborn and its surroundings. Therefore, that they hold the key to success or failure in November. Clever strategy. I don't buy the reasoning behind it, but what's our strategy? What's our strategy to ensure that our vote is taken seriously and that elected officials don't just play with us when they want our vote and forget us the day after? Hold them accountable. Be in touch with them. Thank those who stand with us. Chastise those who don't, but don't sit silently. You have a computer at your fingertips. These things are easy to convey. And finally, as I wrap up, I want to quote what I think is one of the most powerful, poignant statements ever made in modern Jewish history. Menachem Begin was Prime Minister of Israel. It was 1982. He appeared before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and Senator Joe Biden, as it turned out, was one of the members. And Joe Biden mentioned potentially punishing Israel with a cut in aid. By the way, Joe Biden has been a lifelong friend of Israel, but it so happens that on this occasion, he threatened that. And here is Menachem Begin's response. Learn it by heart. You'll find it easily. Imprint it. Carry it with you. Don't threaten me with cutting off your aid, Begin said. It will not work. I am not a Jew with trembling knees. I am a proud Jew with 3,700 years of history, civilized history. Nobody came to our aid when we were dying in the gas chambers and ovens. Nobody came to our aid when we were striving to create our country. We paid for it. We fought for it. We died for it. We will stand by our principles. We will defend them. And when necessary, we will die for them again, with or without your aid. Menachem Begin, 1982, as relevant in 2024. Am Yisrael Chai. This is David Harris, defending Israel. See you next week.